instead of reading the newspaper, I have to read a biography and fit it in. You know, it was exhausting.
Wow, an amazing process. I think that leads really well into my first question, if you're ready to roll.
I'm ready to roll, sure.
Cool, all right.
And where do I look? Look at you.
That'd be great, unless we have other direction.
No, just having conversation.
Cool.
Okay. Here's a time when being aggressive is good. You want to be aggressive with your work. You want it to succeed. You want to be persistent. When something is unjust in this world, when you think something is unfair, you want to be aggressive in fighting it. Okay, I know I'm aggressive, here I can challenge. So awareness of your nature is so much better than denial and repression.
So Robert, my first question is the relationship of mastering something and time. How do you navigate that? Are there shortcuts? Are there ways to get there a little quicker? Things like reading, maybe?
Well, I'm of the belief that if you want a shortcut, you're already not very well suited for becoming a master. Your need for a shortcut is a bad idea, is already a sign of trouble. To master anything, you need patience. You need to know about the 10,000 hour rule, which is a bit of a cliche now. Everyone sort of talks about it. Nobody really understands or has gone into, very few people have gone into depth about what that means. It's a great study that pretty much demonstrated that after 10,000 hours of repetition in practicing a particular skill set, something literally happens to the human brain. A transformation occurs. And the study was based on simple things that you could study, like chess, where you're basically playing the same game and you've put in 10,000 hours and you have a mastery of the board and the process. You're not having to think anymore. And so after studying great chess players and musicians, it was determined that reaching that 10,000 hour mark was something magical. Now it could be 9,500 hours, it could be 10,000. It depends, there's a little leeway, but it's great science. So to answer your question, you have to be willing to go through that process and go through those hours. Every field is different. Some fields require several skills. You're not just learning chess, you're learning business and you're learning the certain technical aspects and et cetera. You're combining skills. So that might require a little bit more than 10,000 hours. But the idea that I can somehow short circuit the process is a bad psychology. You're already setting yourself up for failure and impatience. I say that there's one shortcut that I will be willing to acknowledge, and that is having a great mentor. Mm-hmm. So if you have somebody who is an expert in the field or you respect and has already put in the 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 hours, that person can steer you. They can say, look, Brendan, you're pretty good at this skill, but you have this weakness. Start working more on that. And normally, if you didn't have a mentor, our tendency in practicing a skill, is to over-practice what we're already good at. Yeah. So let's just take basketball, for instance. You have a great outside shot, three-point shot, but you really suck when it comes to taking the defender off the dribble and being able to create some space for a shot or a layup. Your tendency will be to practice that outside three-point shot because you're already good at it and it feels good and it's fun. And you don't want to have to practice taking someone off the dribble because it's hard. You have to work with a defender. You have to overcome that and practice exactly what you're not good at, and it's not easy. A mentor will tell you, will look at you and say, you're weak here, practice that. They'll also say, avoid this, don't waste time here. They could cut that 10,000 hours down to 9,000 maybe if they're really good, they're really smart. Or instead of wasting your time and you having to go to 12,000 hours, they'll bring it down closer to that target level. That's the only shortcut I will acknowledge. But in general, relying on that crutch, thinking in your mind, God damn, if I can find an Algorand app that's going to shortcut it, you're already a loser.
Yeah.
In my book.
Yeah.
So get over that. Embrace the pain. is what I say. Pain is good for you. It's great for you. When you work out, we all like to work out. I'm a fanatic of working out, and particularly swimming is my thing. It's painful.
Yeah.
You know, I swim long distances. I used to swim several miles. Now I can only do like a mile and a half at the most. But you know, you reach the half a mile or 3/4 mile, man, it's like, this is no fun. But when you finish and you've gone through weeks and months, you feel the value that you get is much greater than the pain. That pain, that resistance is good for you. And the idea that you want to sweeten the pot or shortcut or get something, you know, like a sugar high, you're already on dangerous ground.
Yeah. So were you naturally inclined to do things like these long swims and take on pain and go through a rigorous writing process, or did you have a way to build into taking pain?
I probably have a high tolerance for pain. I kind of probably built it up. I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. Some of it, I think, is slightly genetic. It's hard to say. I know my father, for instance, was very meticulous. He was not an intellectual or by any means. He was somebody really good with his hands. I told you he was a mechanic in the Navy. Yeah. But he loved building models, and he would build elaborate models of ships. You know, 18th century, 17th century galleons, etc. And I would watch him, and he was just incredibly patient for that kind of detail. I have no patience for working with my hands. I'm not very good at that. So, but maybe I kind of inherited that a little bit. And some of it, you know, when you're younger, when you're in your 20s, I probably didn't have nearly as much patience as I did. You've got that youthful energy, you're bursting, you want to try many different things. Yeah. You know, so I'm sure when I was in my 20s, I was a bit scattered and trying different things. But I found working on books, the kind of books I write, was actually the perfect thing for me. If I never found the kind of book like the 48 Laws of Power, I might not have amounted to much, because I am a little bit scattered by nature. And having to write a book made me focus, it worked into all of my strengths, because I love reading. So I think writing the books has kind of altered my brain and made me a lot better able to withstand that. But when it came to exercise, I've always sort of liked long distances, cross-country running. I can't do that anymore, but I used to run. I don't know why, but I liked the distance type things where you had to overcome your own mind. You had to kind of discipline your own, those levels of pain. So I always sort of enjoyed that kind of thing. Maybe I have a masochist at heart, I don't know.
Well, maybe I am too. I was a cross-country runner in college and things, and could completely relate.
Well, also those kind of things like cross-country running or the swimming distances, it's very meditative. Mm-hmm. You kind of zone out after several miles running. It's kind of nice. You get a little bit of a high from it. And that high gets addicting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So to this idea of shortcuts and maybe a mentor being the shortcut, if there is one. You've talked in Mastery about how you can learn from a book, how you can kind of see a book as a mentor. You can have a conversation with the author. You can read in a more active way. How should someone go about that process?
Well, God, that's a good question. I talk a little bit about it in my new book. A lot of the time when you're reading a book, it depends on what the book is about, really. I mean, you're kind of, the material that you're reading you tend to make it dead. And I'm thinking what you want to do is to make it come to life. Mm-hmm. So reading a book is like bringing something dead to life. It's like taking Frankenstein and imbuing it with life. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you're kind of reading it mechanically, just the words. You're not paying great attention. You don't realize that the writer, if it's a good writer, when they had those thoughts that they're writing about, it was something very exciting to them at the moment, very alive. And they tried to put it on paper. And whenever you write an idea down, something is lost in the translation. Like when it was in your mind, it was very exciting, and when it came onto paper, that's not quite it. Your process is to kind of get inside the writer and feel that excitement. Feel it's what I call empathy. It's partly empathy. It's in mastery, I call it thinking from the inside out. You go inside the book, inside the spirit. You try and recapture what they were feeling, not just what they were writing. I know that's abstract, and we could talk for 3 hours about the process. But for instance, on another level, let's say a biography. Napoleon Bonaparte was the hero of the 33 Strategies of War, one of my favorite people to study. I call him the Mozart of warfare. He went well beyond the 10,000 hours when it came to strategy. He was absolutely a genius. I read maybe 4,000 pages worth of material on Napoleon to prepare for this book.
Gosh.
Particularly one great book called The Campaigns of Napoleon by, I believe it's David Chandler. It's about 1,400 pages, and it's incredible detail about every battle with great maps. I highly, book's way out of print, quite expensive, but it's if you love Napoleon and you're into battles and maps, this is the book for you. Anyway, my goal was, I want to bring Napoleon to life. I want to feel like he's in the room with me here. I want to know how he thought, what made him a genius. So I go into it and I'm trying to dig it up and come to terms with what's alive about Napoleon. And I found that the books I read were missing his genius. They were not quite getting at it. I'm not saying I'm the only one that did, but I felt like at a certain point I understood him. I understood how his brain worked. And I came to the conclusion that what made Napoleon so great was he had a mind for organizing information that was vastly superior to anybody else before the invention of computers. And it was his ability to assimilate vast amounts of information and create strategies in the moment that made him feel so superior. That's the kind of reading that I'm talking about, where you're not just on the surface, not just reading the words, but you're thinking, you're analyzing it, you're bringing it to term in relation to your own life, your own experiences, and you're making Frankenstein come to life.
Yeah. Is there any?
I mean, it's very abstract. I can go into more, but that's sort of my method.
Yeah. I would wonder if you have any specific tactics on that. I know, like when I read Mastery, I held a pen and I was all over it, circling, dog-earing, jotting notes in the margins, and that helped me to engage with the ideas in a deeper way than I would have if I'd been sort of more passive. Do you have anything specific you like?
I mean, you just hit on it. It's versus the passive form of reading. So you're active. So you're arguing with the writer. This is one idea.
Yeah.
So I always write in the margins. Some people hate that. They feel like writing in a book is sacrilegious, like you're spoiling it, or.
Yeah.
But I'm not like that. I write a lot, and if I don't like a writer, and that happens often, and I get angry, I start putting giant X's, and I say, fuck you. And I say that, I say, fuck you.
Yeah.
I get really angry.
Yeah.
But otherwise, usually I like it, and I'm putting exclamation mark, great, yes, and I engage. So you're engaging with the material. You're not as you say, you're not a passive reader. You're arguing with it. You're thinking. So the problem here is it slows you down. You're not unless it's a bad book. Bad books or mediocre books I kind of can skim. But if it's a really good book, it engages you. You're arguing with it. You're writing it. It slows you down. That's for sure. But I maintain it's better to read one juicy book that grabs you, that really engages you, that really makes you think, than to read 10, kind of trivial books that don't have it. So writing in the margins, arguing with the book, trying to think more deeply about what the writer is saying, analyzing instead of just reading it, and bringing it to your own life. So if I'm talking about, like in Mastery, just to bring in the war aspect, Cesar Rodriguez, the fighter pilot,
Yes.
who's the last decorated, what do you call it?
An ace.
Ace in the in Air Force. Was he in the Air Force or the Marines?
Air Force.
Air Force. Thank you, God. You know, I'm talking about. He was someone who was not your typical ace. He wasn't a golden boy. He's like 5'5". He didn't look like a fighter pilot, and he felt like he had 3 strikes against him the moment he started. He was a slow learner. He wasn't a natural at it, and so he had to learn. I call it trusting the process. That if he practiced harder than the golden boys, if he spent more hours on the simulator than they did, if he didn't take for granted his skill, he would catch up with them. Now you're reading that and you're going, blah, 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 and you're not really paying attention. But if you're smart, you're going, all right, when did that happen to me? You know, when have I, like, in a sport, I felt like this wasn't good for me. Maybe I gave up too early. I talk about the frustration and how frustration is a good thing for you. If you're frustrated, it shows your body and your mind is telling you that you can actually overcome something. And the moment you're feeling frustration is actually a turning point, a good moment. Relate that to yourself. Don't read about Cesar Rodriguez and think blah, 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 blah. Relate that to your own experience when you felt frustration and you either gave up or you push through it. That's active reading. That's making something come to life.
Yeah. So frustration as a good thing, as something that we want. Are you saying it's a trigger? It's something to look for?
Definitely. If you don't feel frustrated when you're learning something, you're not learning.
Okay.
And you're deluding yourself, and you're probably going. So they call that practice that I mentioned before, where you practice what you're weak at, deliberative practice in the business. When people talk about skills, you're deliberately working on what you're not good at. Your tendency is to try and make things easy for you because you don't like pain. We humans don't like pain. So if you're going through your practice and things are really easy, I'm enjoying it, it's fun, you're probably not learning, you're probably doing this lopsided practice that we're talking about. And you're avoiding your weaknesses, and things are going too smoothly. It's the frustration isn't just the fact also that you're not mastering it. It's also that it's kind of it seems like a mystery. You don't quite know what you need to do. Something is eluding you, and I maintain, and it's a little bit. You have to believe me, because there's not rigorous science behind this. I usually like to have things backed by rigorous science. It's based more on things that athletes talk about. But that moment of frustration, or actually mathematicians have talked about it, that moment of deepest frustration is actually a signal from your body, physically a signal, that you're actually on the way to a breakthrough. That you feel it's telling you, it's a signal that something is churning up inside you and you're not yet aware of it. So a lot of that is based on anecdotal evidence, like a great mathematician like this man Jacques Hadamard that I talk about. He would say his greatest breakthroughs, or Einstein, came just at that moment where you were about to give up. And there's a great instance of anecdote about the composer Brahms, and he was so frustrated with this one symphony that he was trying to write that he said, I'm giving up. I can't write it. I said, that's it. And the moment he gave up, the next day, all the perfect solution came to him. So there's a lot of, and athletes talk about that. So I'm basing it on anecdotal evidence and my own experience. When I'm writing a chapter, I get so frustrated and so annoyed. My girlfriend, I'm like driving her up a wall, I'm just like yelling at the cat. I can't take it anymore. I'm the worst writer. I'm about to give up. And like, it's almost mechanical. The next day or 2 days later, it all comes to, it all fits. So if you go through that enough, you know that that frustration is a good thing. And once you know that, it's very liberating because you're able to wait for the breakthrough moment that will come. You don't give up. You give up, maybe, but you're kind of kidding yourself, knowing that the moment you say, I give up, tomorrow or the next day, the great idea will come to you. So it's a little bit of faith, but frustration, if you don't have the frustration, you're not on the right path.
Well, that's a fascinating take on this.
Yeah, I wish I had more science, but maybe it's another book to write someday about that.
Maybe, yeah. But yeah, I think most of us tend to go with what's comfortable. We tend to follow the path of least resistance and to go where it feels good. So amazing. Robert, you talked about Cesar Rodriguez and being a golden boy, and so many people, they'll follow sort of a predetermined track in career. And I see this in the military all the time. People talk about in their particular line of work, they want to follow the golden path. You go to this job and then to this job, and then you become a commanding officer one day. For people who want to develop mastery, though, how can they navigate while still wanting to progress in rank and things, but also meeting what's going to be best for them and true to that life's task that you talk about?
Well, I'm not in the military, so I don't know exactly what you're facing or the different options that you have. And I'm a practical person, so I never tell people just go follow whatever you want to follow. It's because that's bullshit. You have to make a living. You have to fit into the structure of the military. There are only so many different kinds of positions you could go after. But within those constraints of the field that you're in, there's some room, right?
Yeah.
And the problem that most people have is they follow what other people are doing, or they follow the career path that leads to the most money, the most attention, the most glory, that seems like the most exciting, the sexiest thing, because that's what other people are doing. And they're not actually looking at what their inclination, what I call your own inclinations are, who you are, what you actually really love. So within the constraints of a military career, and that's what you want, there are, let's say, 8 different paths you can go on, career paths. Could there be something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. So your job is not, it's like in ecology, when you have an ecological landscape, I don't know what the word is, an ecosphere. The animals that survive are the ones that find a niche. There's no other animal that has a beak this long that can suck that kind of flower and get the nectar out. It can now survive. The animals that try and become like other ones that follow where all the other animals succeed at don't usually survive because they have to be the best at it. I'm kind of simplifying it, but there's truth to this.
Yeah.
It's the same in the career world, where if you follow what everyone else is doing, what seems like the sexiest, most attractive position, it's going to be crowded. It's going to be crowded with a lot of people who are vying for the same thing, who are probably better at it. It's best to find what you love and combine it with something that already exists out there, a career path, and to adapt it to your spirit and to not go where everyone else is going. It depends on the specifics of the military, but I can say, let's say for writing, for me, it's easier for me to talk about that. Everybody in Los Angeles is a screenwriter. You go to a cafe and all the waiters and waitresses are screenwriters.
Yeah.
Right? It's disgusting. How can there be so many screenwriters? If there's only so many films being made, what are they? But it's true. And I used to work in Hollywood, and everyone's trying to write a screenplay. Well, it's it's so crowded, your chances of success are so slim. You're like those 5 million salmon swimming upstream in Oregon and only 2 are gonna make it, right? That's what it's like. Okay, and I was in that pool with the 10 million other salmon trying to write a screenplay, and it wasn't working. And because I wasn't suited for it, it wasn't me. I don't actually like Hollywood that much. I like movies, but I don't like that much. I like history, and I like philosophy, and I like science. So I found my way by listening to myself, by listening to what I hated and kind of gravitating towards it, to create a form of writing that suited me, where there was no competition. You know, I mean, it's a self-help book, but there's nobody really out there writing books like it. So I have it all to myself. You know, it's like finding a field, a meadow, where it's all for you, as opposed to that other meadow where there's like 10,000 people crowded on it. It's great. And so that's what it's like. It's not going to be quite the same in the military, obviously. You're not going to find that one niche that you're by yourself, but you're going to find something more suited to you. Mm-hmm. How you find what's more suited to you, that's a whole other question, and I talk about it in the book. We can go into that if you want, but and it's probably the most important question of your life, is to find out what you really want to do.
Well, with that kind of endorsement, then I'd love to go further into it.
Okay. Well, you know, it's chapter 1 of Mastery. It's called Discover Your Life's Task, your calling in life, your vocation, however you want to describe it. And I say it's the most important decision that you'll ever make, because it won't. Not only will it determine your career, your success, how much money you make, it will also determine how happy you are, how fulfilled you feel in life. I have numerous quotes from people like Leonardo da Vinci and others, that the worst thing is to be turning 50, 60 years old and to feel like you never realized your potential. You never did what you felt like you could have done. Yeah. It's like, that's the worst feeling. So you don't want to have that feeling, particularly if you're younger, in your 20s, and you have more options, or even in your 30s. So it's a question of knowing yourself. You know, the Oracle of Delphi in ancient Greece, which was the center of all wisdom, the priestess in the Oracle of Delphi was supposedly in touch with the god Apollo, who would tell her the truth of anything in the universe. And what was the inscription above the Oracle of Delphi? Was know yourself, know thyself. It's the start of all wisdom. So your tendency will be, when you're a child, when you're 5 or 6, to kind of know that you like this. You like sports, you like physical activity, or you like music, or you like words, or you like working with your hands. You have a feel for it. It's natural. And as you get older, you start to listen to other people, and you lose a sense of who you are. You listen to your parents who tell you, Brendan, you got to become a lawyer. You need to go into this field. Your friends are all scrambling to make a lot of money, and you lose this connection to who you are, to what your strengths are, to what you love. And the whole thing about learning is, learning has to be fun. I know I'm contradicting myself in that I said frustration is good, but you need to also love what you're studying. So I give the example, I've said it many times in interviews, that if you're wanting to learn French, for instance, this is something that happened to me. In university, you could spend years learning French from a professor, and after 2 years you go to France, you can't speak a damn word, right? Because you really weren't that interested, you weren't listening, it's not exciting, it's not fun. But you go to France and you meet a French girl and you're really excited and you want to seduce her, you want to whatever. All right, now you're motivated to learn French. You're really motivated, and it's fun. Mm-hmm. and you're listening to her and you're listening to others, and suddenly in 2 weeks you learn what in 2 years you never learned. The mind is more receptive when you're excited, when you're liking something, when you're interested in it. So we were talking about shortcuts. Well, it's not a shortcut, but it streamlines the process a little bit, because when you know that in your own experience, when you're studying math and you don't like math, it goes in one ear out the other. But if you love math, you're paying deep attention and you absorb things. So connecting to the subject, loving it, you will learn much faster. So you have to know yourself. You have to know what you're good at, what you love. There's a book I recommend for people. I can't remember the exact title. I think it's called The 5 Frames of Intelligence, something like that, by I think it's Howard Gardner. And he's basically saying that there are 5 forms of intelligence. One of them is kinetic, which has to do with physical motion. One is mechanical, having to do with spatial things. One is like music and math. One is words, etc. You're going to tend to have a mind that has one of these forms of intelligence. What is it? Know yourself. Know what that is. For me, it's language and words, etc. It's getting in contact with who you are, what you love, going back to that child, rooting out all the voices of your parents and your friends, finding those things that when you read online and you find a subject, what your eyes light up at, what you want to explore. It's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. It depends on how old you are, where you are in life. It's never too late to make an adjustment or to find who you are. I didn't write the 48 Laws of Power or start writing until I was 36. And up until that moment, I was kind of a lost soul. I was kind of unhappy and I was wandering around. It can take time. As long as you're trying, as long as you're exploring, it'll probably come. But if you're only following what other people are doing, you're in trouble. You might succeed for a while. You might get that law degree and make money, and when you're 28, like your mom and dad want you to. But by the time you're 34, you're tuning it out. You're drinking. You're getting on drugs. You're doing online porn. You're so out of it. You're so disconnected. You fall into various addictions, and it may not be something that destructive, but it's not engaging you. And you might have succeeded for a while, but you're going to pay a price. I'm telling you, it's the most important decision that you can have, is connecting to it and making it practical. So you're not going to want to become a poet or a rock musician just because you love music. All right, I'm going to start my own band. That's not necessarily practical, okay? But you love music. All right, let's find a path in music that is practical, that you can use. And maybe it will end up being a rock band, who knows? I don't want to discourage that, but I knew I wanted to write. That gave me the latitude to explore this vast area and then find my niche. Mm-hmm. You know that you love working with your hands. Okay, explore this. Or you love computers. Explore the whole area and you'll find your niche. But you've got to know what that first overall ecosphere is that you want to explore. Brandon, we could talk about it for hours, so I'm just going to shut up at this point, but you need to read Mastery to know more about it. But it is literally, to me, I want you to look at it as life and death, because you can spiritually die from engaging most of your working hours, your mental energy, in something that you don't love.
Well, yeah, and the things you talk about that people would slip into in a situation like that, the drugs, pornography, alcohol, that is a path to death. That is, I mean, yeah. Even if you're not dead, living where you use those things as crutches to get you through the day,
yeah,
is a path to death.
And there are a lot of people like that in the world today.
Definitely.
I mean, the great thing about the times that we live in is that there's more latitude than ever. People of color, people of minorities, women, barriers are falling down. You could choose, more latitude for that. We don't have to follow what our father did. I don't have to become what, in the past. You sort of were kind of more pigeonholed into what careers you could have. And there's this vast area on the internet, et cetera, access to information and knowledge. So it could be a golden era for finding yourself in this way, but it's also a very dark era in that there are many paths to lose yourself in. And so you have to be strong, and you have to know that this is the path that I want to follow, and to follow it with a lot of energy, because there are a lot of dangers in the world.
Yeah, and it takes a disciplined person, I think, to pursue something in the way that you talk about in mastery, to keep working at it when there are so many options. And you could try to be a doctor and a lawyer and a dentist and all those things all at once and keep them open rather than pursuing.
Yeah, and I like giving concrete examples. So I give one more example on this subject. There's somebody I talk about in there, Paul Graham, who started a company most recently called Y Combinator. I mean, he started it 12 years ago, and he sold it, but it's a billion-dollar company in Silicon Valley. He's a genius. He's a master, and I like his story because of the path. He loved computers. He was a hacker. I mean, a real hacker when he was 17 years old, back in the 70s, when hacking was, there weren't very many of them. And then so he got into computer sciences, and he thought that was his path. And AI in the late 70s, when AI was not really, nobody knew about it. And then it wasn't quite working. He wasn't happy. It didn't feel right. He hated academia. He hated politics. He hated offices. He was a rebel. He gave it all up, and he decided, I want to be an artist. I want to paint. And he went to Italy, and he went to art school, and he learned to paint, and he really loved that. And then he came back to New York, and he was kind of an artist in his loft in New York. He wasn't making any money, but things were okay. And then he heard an ad on the radio in 1995 saying that the future of the internet is people will be selling things on the internet. And suddenly a light bulb went on in his head. He goes, man, all right, I've had all these skills. I could make a platform that will allow people to buy things on the internet. And I can design it because I've been studying design. In other words, not just computers and AI and all that. I've been studying what's aesthetics and what's pleasing to the eye and the psychology of art and how to design things. So he took all of his experience in hacking, in artificial intelligence, in art, and he created what ended up selling to Yahoo. I forget what it's called, Yahoo something or other. It was the first platform for selling things on the internet. He made a fortune, and that ended up leading to one other venture and then to Y Combinator. He didn't know what he was doing. He was lost. He tried different things, and by the time he was 30, he had developed 5 skill sets, literally, that were so solid that it would come together at some point. Something would trigger that moment hearing something on the radio. It may not have been that. It may not have been Netscape. It may have been something else. But it's like a soil that was so fertile with skills. Something great was about to happen, and that's a path I think is really rich to imitate.
Yeah, it reminds me of how we often poeticize the myth of Steve Jobs, and how Steve Jobs studied calligraphy and fonts and things like that, and that was one more thing that was part of his path to mastery and becoming who he was.
Yeah, people don't realize Steve Jobs was actually not much of a computer person. He was quite mediocre in his computer skills. It was Wozniak who was the hacker. I mean, he wasn't terrible, but that wasn't his strength. His strength was design. Mm-hmm. And his story is interesting because when he's like 5 or 6 years old, he's walking with his stepfather somewhere in Silicon Valley where they grew up. He grew up in Northern California. And he passes an electronics store with all the gizmos in it of the time with their tubes and everything. And he goes, wow. He got so excited. by technology, but the design of technology, and this is a 5-year-old, that's what I'm talking about, like when you're a kid, in a very visceral way, something strikes you. And that's what he ended up becoming. It wasn't technology, it was the design element. That's what his genius was bringing together a pretty good knowledge of technology with a great knowledge of fonts, calligraphy, modern design to create his greatest breakthrough, which people don't realize, which was the iPod that started all of the changes that we now have. So he's a perfect example of what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember that the first iPod I ever got, and it was this masterful piece of technology. It was beautiful, it was fun to touch, it was fun to use.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Robert, you're a master strategist. I want to know, looking at situations where maybe you come across a tough boss in the workplace. This could be in the Navy, this could be anywhere.
Is this a personal?
There have been moments.
I've had people do this before where they try to say, I have a friend.
Yeah.
There's
another guy.
Okay, yeah, anyway, go ahead.
Who wants to figure out how to navigate these situations. And you've talked in Mastery about how it starts with, to gain social intelligence, it starts with a look at oneself and your own biases and why things are triggering you. How can someone use that to handle their workplace situations? First to look at themselves and then to figure out how to navigate the social sphere of work.
Well, I would tell them to read the 568 pages of my new book because it's something I go into a lot. It's kind of scattered throughout the book, which is basically what I took in that is chapter 4 in Mastery on Social Intelligence and expanded it into an entire book. You know, there's a whole literature about what we call the psychotic boss. We've all dealt with that. I've had to. It's the boss where nothing you can do quite will ever please them. They're very difficult. And it's a really awful situation. And then there are gradations where there's the less than psychotic boss, but he or she's just an a-hole and they're just really hard to deal with, you know?
Yeah.
We've all been through that. Well, okay, so what I'm talking about and what you're referencing is you have to realize the worst thing is to take everything personally and get emotional. So people who are psychotic bosses, their power is in grabbing your emotions and entangling you in a drama. They're better at it. They're more aggressive. They're nastier. They're more difficult. They're more amoral than you are. You're never going to win playing to their strengths. They thrive on making you emotional. So you have to learn in general in life to stop taking things so emotionally. Now, it's not everything. I do want you to fall in love and have a family and love your children, etc. But in the work world, it pays to cool things down and to realize that it is never personal. So when you're facing this person, this boss, your tendency is to take it personally, to think their anger and their difficultness and their aggression is directed at you, that there's something about you they don't like, or whatever.
Definitely. This other guy, he felt like the person was trying to pick on him. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It's never about you personally. Never. Hardly ever. People who are like this, I go in the book, I delve deeply into their psychology. I give you numerous ways for understanding them. But the gist of it is they're reenacting dramas from their own troubled childhood. They have terrible issues. They're reliving things from their horrible father or their mean narcissistic mother or whatever it was. Generally from very early in childhood, maybe a little bit later. And you're the target. They're just simply replaying their old dramas with new actors. It's not personal. It has nothing to do with you. Don't take it personally. See them for what they are. Understand that they are twisted people with some kind of issues. And I talk about what these various issues are. I go into it, into all the different types of horrible people that there are in this world. And there are a good many types of them, from the passive aggressive to the narcissist, to the control freak, to all those types, you know? Knowledge will liberate you. Knowing that this is what is motivating them, all right, now I have options. I don't have to react. I don't have to get emotional. I can retreat. I can withdraw. I can play certain games on them that'll, if you want to infuriate them and imbalance them so they'll leave you alone, you have more than enough material to do that. You have deterrent strategies from deterring them from being aggressive. You have options when you have knowledge. The other thing is you cut them down to size. You see them as the little child stomping their feet. In the war book, I'm having to read, Joseph Stalin is sort of my quintessence of the awful psychotic boss. There's nobody worse in history than Joseph Stalin. Imagine you have a boss that if you anger, you're sent to the gulag and you're going to die. So you have a boss that is holding life and death over you. He's terrible. He's horrible. I talk in War about the great Russian composer Shostakovich, who suddenly is meeting face to face with Stalin. He's so intimidating. He's got this look where he's just like, people were like, I'm serious. People would literally shit in their pants when he looked at them at this certain way, because they knew he looked at them that way. They're going to go they're going to the gulag. They're going to die.
Yeah, life is on the line.
Their life is on the line. He gave that look to Shostakovich. Basically, this other person that was in the meeting was saying, Stalin was upset because this was a meeting about who was going to compose the new national anthem for the Soviet Union after World War II. And Shostakovich had written something, and Khachaturian and something, and Stalin was critiquing these people, and this one, and he was critiquing this one man's orchestration, and the man said, well, you know what, I actually didn't orchestrate it, this other guy did. And Shostakovich was realizing he just signed the death warrant for that young man who did the orchestration by saying that he did the faulty orchestration. It literally was going to mean that. So Shostakovich, in a flash, realized that it didn't fall for Stalin's intimidation game. He saw him as a little child, as a 6-year-old boy with a philandering father and a mother who beat him and an awful childhood, and he cut him down to size. I'm not intimidated by this man. He does not intimidate me. And in that moment, he had presence of mind, and he said, oh, such and such, your orchestrator is a very fine orchestrator. You shouldn't blame him. You know, you should do your own orchestration from now on. He sort of saved the situation. But the mental process was, he cut this person down to size. He didn't fall for the myth. He saw them as a human being with temper tantrums, with issues, etc. When you fall for the myth, when you start thinking that they're greater than they are, when you start trembling, when your bowels start moving from fear, you're in their grasp. When you're reasonably calm, you maintain your presence of mind, you see them as a little baby that's throwing a tantrum, or whatever it is, you've got some control and you have options. If we're talking about strategy, the number one strategic principle that I say is the most important of all is the person who has options, has more options, is the one who will win in a competitive situation. If you only have one option, you're generally under the control of your opponent. But if you create a situation where you're there and you can go here, 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 or here, that means you can react in the moment and you can take the path that might be the best for that situation. You always want options. And when you get emotional, when you react, when you get caught in their drama, you have only one option: anger. You start repeating in your mind the same thing over and over and over again. You've lost. You've already lost. When you're calm and you can not say anything, you can quit, you can be a toady for a few moments but not really feel like that's who you are. All right, you can choose. You're in control. and that asshole boss is not in control because you have options.
Wow, amazing. Robert, you have such a knack for metaphor and image, and so many of the images of power and strategy that you use are about water. There's something dynamic about it. There's water, there's rivers, there's tidal waves. What is it about that idea that's so appealing in strategy and power?
Well, I swim a lot. You know, I'm kind of obsessed. My girlfriend will tell you, I take trips just so I can swim. You know, or in the ocean, or in this city, they have a great swimming pool, kind of thing. So, you know, that's one thing. But, you know, it's about fluidity, and it's a certain philosophy of life, of flowing with what, you know, water can wear down the largest boulder. Give it 500 years, it'll turn that boulder into a pebble. And it's just through the force of that water. It's, if you've ever taken a dam and released it, you know the power in water is intense. It can kill you. It has so many. It has so many. It's also the source of life. Without water on this planet, we wouldn't even be here talking. A planet without water is a dead planet. And it's the greatest metaphor for strategy in Asian strategy. Now, I'm a great fan of Asian strategy, maybe more than Western strategy, because I think they understand strategy better, and those in the West who do understand strategy are more aligned with Asians. So von Clausewitz is actually kind of similar to Sun Tzu. Napoleon was probably the Western general who actually is most like what's the ideal of a Sun Tzu general, at least the early Napoleon. And for Sun Tzu and for Asian philosophy, water is the essence of strategy. It's adapting to the moment. It's always flowing to where you can channel it, where it's being channeled. It's using the kind of energy of the moment, what Sun Tzu calls shi, the kind of position of ultimate power is like water that's been dammed up and now it can explode. So the formlessness of water, you know, it's the last law of the 48 laws of power is appear formless. I forget what the verb is never taking a form, is being fluid in life, is people don't know you, they can't predict what you're going to do next. You're always reacting to the moment. You know, the word flow for rappers, it's got so many points of convergence when it comes to powerful thinking, as opposed to rigid thinking that thinks in terms of preset concepts. That I'm just drawn to it from 1,000 different directions, and I've even built it into my new book. I'm always somehow returning to water, but I think it's just the essence. It describes the essence of true strategic thinking, and most people are not fluid in life. They're always coming at life. They're fighting the last battle. They have certain preconceptions, certain stereotypes. They're not in the moment. That when they are interacting with a stranger or a new person, they're never quite keying into what makes them different. They don't have flow. So I don't know. I'm dancing around it, but it's hard to put in concrete terms something that's kind of poetic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you said fighting the last battle. I think something that we often talk about in the military is getting frustrated with, that's the way we've always done it. How can we protect ourselves from fighting the last battle, from getting into doing things the way we've always done them?
Well, you know, let's be realistic. The military is a large organization. It's you know, it's bureaucratic. It has to be bureaucratic when you've got hundreds of thousands of people in your employ. Everyone can't just be flowing and doing their own thing. You've got to have structure. Okay, we get that. But if you want to be successful, you got to learn to loosen up. You know, in the military sense, we were kind of loose in World War II because we didn't have a great military tradition yet. It was sort of the first instance, I mean, World War I a little bit, but where our military might was on display. And we had some great generals in World War II who were quite fluid in their thinking. My favorite happens to be Patton, because I think he was quite a brilliant, he maybe wasn't a very good person, but he was a great strategist. And then after World War II, the military, the Pentagon became such a bureaucracy. And it was exactly what George Marshall tried to prevent. He was more of the Defense Department, but he was trying to imbue a very open spirit. It became such a bureaucracy. It became this complex and such rigid thinking, as opposed to maneuver warfare, which is a little bit what was happening in World War II. It became attrition warfare. Let's bomb the Vietnamese. We're going to bomb them into oblivion. We're going to pour the American military might in and level them. And it's very rigid kind of thinking. It's very fighting the last war type thinking. And it led to our greatest disaster, to an utter catastrophe, the worst military adventure in our history. And they learned the lesson. And after the Vietnam War, there was a shakeup in the military. And there were now mavericks coming up. And there were people who said, we have to learn from terrorists and insurgents and guerrilla warfare. And we have to learn counterinsurgency. There were already seeds of that in the 50s, but it really took off after Vietnam. And people like John Boyd, but there were others. And Desert Storm became kind of the model. They kind of let go of that Vietnam sort of syndrome, and they had tremendous success. If you want success in life, if that's your goal, if you want to win, you've got to let go of what worked the last time. So it simply comes down to this formula. Do you really want to win? If you really want to win, if you're not bullshitting, if you're not trying to act like you want to win, but you're just all into the attention and the ego, then go ahead and use the strategy that worked a year ago and think that it will work again, because your ego is tied to that. You think that strategy that worked a year ago is because I'm brilliant. Well, maybe a little bit, but also because the luck, because of the right moment, there were factors. It wasn't just you. You need to adapt. So your ego intervenes and you think, I've got to do what I did last time because that means I'm great. And to try something else means maybe I'm not so great. That means you're not really into winning. If you really want to win, if you really want to be successful, you have to be in the moment. You have to look at the circumstances. No two battles are the same. Yes, there are similarities. Yes, Hannibal's defeat of the Romans at Cannae bears some similarities to some of the counterattack strategies that were used in World War II, or I don't know exactly what, but there are some parallels. But it's never the same, right? The technology is different. It's never the same. Every war is different. Every battle in life is different. That doesn't mean you let go of everything you believe in. Maybe the last strategy will work, but you want to face a new situation. Let's say you start a job. All right, it's a new battle. My new job is a new battle. And you're going to refresh yourself, like you hit that refresh button on the computer. I'm starting over. I'm letting go of my preconceptions. I'm in the moment. I'm studying the people that I'm now around. And I'm at square one, or I'm back to zero. And I'm going to reassess and fight from that position. When I write a book, each book, I go back to zero. I tell myself, Robert, you're actually a terrible writer. This is going to be your worst book. This book is going to suck. People are going to really think that you lost it. Your mother's going to not return your phone calls. She's going to be ashamed. You are not great. But you got to up your game because this book is above you. I'm serious. I'm not neurotic. But it works, you know?
Obviously.
Julius Caesar, had a slave whispering into his ear, you are mortal, Julius, you are mortal. Everywhere he went, you are not a god, you are mortal. You need that person whispering in your ear, making you realize that you're not so great. Don't let your ego get involved. And if you want to win, you have to look at each situation as different. What are the circumstances? What is the zeitgeist? What is the element of luck and timing that worked the last time that won't work this time, etc.
Yeah. So you talk about your writing process, and you have a new book coming out soon on human nature, and it's apparent through all your books that you have a keen understanding of human nature. You could say that so many of them are about human nature. So what new insights are you coming to in this new process?
Well, I mean, the insights, okay. I'm basically of the opinion, I like looking at us as if we are animals, which we are, okay? And so when you look at zebras, or even your pet dog, they have certain behavior patterns that are obvious after a few, they're pretty simple, and you can study them. And the zebra will always go to the water hole at this time of day to avoid, your dog will always do this. Well, we're not, we think we're so sophisticated, but we're actually, like a zebra and like a dog. We have patterns of behavior. We're not limitless in what we can do. We're not gods. We can't suddenly do something that's not in our nature. We have a nature. Where does that nature come? Well, yes, we're more complicated than a dog or a zebra, obviously. But we're not that much more complicated than chimpanzees, which we are very much related to. And I tell people, if you want a great experience, if you're ever in Australia, go to the zoo in Sydney and watch the chimpanzee compound, and you'll think, God damn, that looks like my office. There's the alpha male kind of strutting around, and all the other chimps kind of following him and imitating him, and it's got looks like your office. So we're not that different from chimpanzees, but we're more complicated than that. But we have a nature. It came from millions of years of development, and there are certain parts of this nature that are pre-verbal, and that I like to indicate. So, for instance, just to choose one of them, and I'm going to answer your question in a minute, but choose one of them. We're a social animal, a highly social animal, and that's what made us survive, and it's made us why we're here today. And we were a social animal before we had language. So we were grunting and we were gesturing, etc. And we had to communicate on a very high level to survive and to hunt. Hunting big game in a group of 10, 12, very complicated. Without language, you try it sometime with like stones, and not easy. Okay, so we had to develop forms of communication, and one of the forms of communication we developed were emotions. Now, emotions, all animals have emotions. Lizards have a fear response. But humans developed much more complicated emotions hundreds of thousands of years ago. And they developed them to show on the face. You could show fear, you would show shame, you would show love or excitement. Animals do, but we had more gradations. We had joy, we had disappointment. And we used it as a form of communication. What this meant was, as a highly social animal, was that our emotions communicated themselves to other people very quickly, and they were contagious. So if one member of a group suddenly felt fear because something was on the horizon, perhaps a leopard was nearby, the group would see it and they would all feel fear together, and they would react together. It bonded the group more tightly. It allowed them to respond to things quickly. So hundreds of thousands of years ago, we developed susceptibility to the emotions of other people in a very powerful way. All right, fast forward 1 million years later to us here today on the internet, scrolling around Facebook or Instagram or whatever the hell you do. You're constantly feeling the emotions of other people. You don't know it. You think You have your opinions, your ideas, because you're just such a smart, rational, independent person. It's bullshit. Your ideas, your emotions, so much of what you think and feel come from other people, viral effects, what everyone's clicking on Facebook, what you're seeing on the screen, what people are excited about or outraged about. Go to a rock concert or any concert and you feel this wave of emotion, everyone bonding. Yeah. It's that animal part of you. Now, that's an element of human nature. That's one of them. I have 18. Okay, it's chapter 14. I talk about the social effect. I talk about our conformity, our conformist principles. It's a nature, it's an element that developed before we were aware that we had language. And it operates within you today on the internet. The most sophisticated piece of technology elicits the same reaction as Homo erectus 800,000 years ago planning a big hunt. We're not different. And so human nature are these forces that operate in us that we don't control, we cannot control. They make us feel envy. They make us feel aggressive. They make us irrational. They make us have a dark side. Everybody has a dark side that they try and repress. It makes us, I don't know, as I said, I have 18. Yeah. It makes us afraid of death. It makes us respond to authority figures a certain way. And these forces were set in hundreds of thousands of years ago. Yes, we've progressed. Yes, things are not the same. I would be an idiot to think that we're exactly the same. No, there are differences, but they're not as many as you think. We're not so different from the people in the Bible. Joseph and his brothers, and the envy of the brothers because he was the favorite of the father, and they threw him in a ditch to die because they felt envy. Envy is a very powerful factor in the world today. So my insight is we're not really aware of who we are. We think we're this creature because we live in this sort of conscious realm with our daily thoughts. But actually there's this stranger inside of us, this animal that has these forces from so deep in our past that's actually very powerful. And you're not even aware of how it governs what you do. And by becoming aware of it, you have something changes. I've noticed it in myself in writing the book. So I have a chapter, for instance, on narcissism and self-absorption, which is clear. Humans are self-absorbed. We've gotten worse in that way. But our tendency is to think, she's a narcissist, he's a narcissist. Never me. It's not me. Are you kidding? I'm the most loving, giving, caring person around.
Of course.
Well, but in writing the book, I realized, hell, I am a narcissist. I am one. Come to terms with it, Robert. You think mostly about yourself. You are kind of in love with yourself. You think your ideas are great. You think, etc. All right, now with that awareness, I can catch myself and I can go, and I make the case that being a narcissist isn't all bad. It's good to have self-love. Because if you don't have that, then you become what I call a deep narcissist, which is very dangerous. You need self-esteem, you need a sense of self-love to anchor yourself in life. So it's okay to be a narcissist, but it can go too far. But now with awareness, I can catch myself and going, all right, you're being that now. And you're closing yourself off from other people. And you're not, this is narcissism in you. And here's aggression. Oh, it's always the other person who's aggressive. I'm not aggressive. I'm so peace-loving. I'm a dove. I never start anything. No, that's not true. You're just as aggressive as anyone else. Women are just as aggressive as men. Let's get over that fallacy. Women have aggressive energy. They might make it into passive aggression, but men can be passive aggressive too. We're an aggressive animal. We're not violent. I make a distinction between violence and aggression. We don't go around killing, not most of us, don't go around killing people, but we have aggressive energy, and it can come out in certain circumstances. When you're aware of it, now it changes. instead of trying to repress it and act like you're a saint, like, wow, man, I'm so PC, I'm so great. And then what happens is, because you're in denial, you actually become very manipulative because you're denying your true nature. But when you're aware of it, you can channel that aggressive energy into positive things, like standing up for yourself. You're in a negotiation situation. Normally you're weak. Normally you're not so strong. You let them kind of determine, all right, no, here's a place where I can become aggressive, and it's right. You're negotiating your contract. You don't want to be grandiose, but here's a time when being aggressive is good. You want to be aggressive with your work. You want it to succeed. You want to be persistent. When something is unjust in this world, when you think something is unfair, you want to be aggressive in fighting it. Okay, I know I'm aggressive, here I can challenge. So awareness of your nature is so much better than denial and repression. So that's the fundamental insight. You don't know who you are. You have these dark forces in you that are governing you. Awareness of those forces is a very liberating thing.
Yeah, back to what we said earlier, know thyself. It's
know
a
thyself.
great starting point.
Yeah.
Robert, I want to be respectful of your time. So before I ask my last question,
Oh, we're already there.
is there a place where people should look for you online, a particular platform?
Well, I wish I were better at this, but I have a website that needs some updating. It's called powerseductionandwar.com. Power, seduction, and the and spelled out war.com. In case people don't know, I wrote a book called The Art of Seduction, so it doesn't sound so weird. It's a little weird, seduction and war, but actually seduction is a form of warfare. And you'll find old blog posts, etc., and a link to a mastery page. I do have a website for mastery. And we're going to build something new for the new book on human nature.
Right.
And I'm going to start blogging a little bit more about things in the news. I haven't blogged for years. And the book will be out October 23rd. And I don't know if you're familiar with Ryan Holiday.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah. Huge fan.
Oh, okay, cool.
One of your proteges.
My protege, yeah. My greatest protege. Well, Ryan handles my digital marketing. He's kind of the digital marketing master. And so we're going to be offering special things where if you subscribe to my site, etc., we'll give you some bonus parts of the human nature book that didn't get into the final version. There'll be goodies for you. But look for that in a couple months, more like in September, closer to the book launch.
On powerseductionandwar.com.
Yes. Well, there'll be links to the new site from there. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So Robert, my final question.
Yes.
If you're talking to a young military leader and they're looking for advice to become a more strategic thinker, what suggestion would you give them?
Well, strategy is a combination. The reason why I like strategy is I'm a practical person. And there's so much bullshit in the world today. People just talking and talking and talking and talking, and they don't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything, right? Strategy is getting results. It's the bridge, I call it the bridge between an idea and the result. And if you're not strategic, you never get the result that you want. So it's a great thing. So it has to be a combination of two things. It has to be the idea and the bridge to the realizing the idea. And one without the other is useless. So if you read a lot of great books on strategy, it's kind of useless. And if you only try and get things done, you don't have a rich enough mind with enough options in your brain to choose from. You want to combine the two. So what does that mean if you're a young person in the military? I'm sure you have to read a lot in your curriculum, etc. So read the classics on strategy. There's so many good ones. It's one area. I happen to think that books now, a lot of writers now, not all, but a lot of writers now are not as good as they were 50, 60 years ago. But in strategy, I'd make an exception. Military writing is better than ever. Some great writers, Martin Van Crevel, Keegan, I could go on and on. A lot of great people writing about Litvak, a lot of people writing about strategy that are really top-notch. But choose your own books. Don't necessarily read what you're given. Read things that are more exciting, that are more relevant necessarily. I don't know, is John Boyd, for instance, Colonel Boyd, someone that is taught in classes these days?
Oh, yeah.
The
OODA
OODA loop?
The OODA loop is huge to, a curriculum on situational awareness I used to teach. It's tremendous.
Okay, so I mean, I'm operating from what I call a knowledge asymmetry. You know, I don't know as much as you do. There are a lot of asymmetries in war, and one of them is information. So I don't know as much as you do. But I'm personally attracted to people like Boyd who are outside the mainstream, but now obviously are accepted. And there are others, and there are other kind of radicals like that who are really interesting. You know, you can look at my bibliography in war. If you want to write to me, I have other books that I recommend. And then becoming a strategist in your life. So in a day-to-day sense, being more strategic, practicing it, not just reading about it. Looking at your, you have children and the boy is acting up. Applying strategy to that situation and using reverse psychology and using a kind of counterattack or flanking maneuver on your son. Not hard to do, and I can talk about that in another interview. Being strategic with your boss and your situation, with your career. Grand strategy. Well, don't just wait for you becoming a general and being in charge of you know, dealing with terrorism in the Middle East. Practice grand strategy on yourself. Where do you want to be in 10 years? That's grand strategic thinking. Okay, I want to be at this point. I want to be, you know, this is a person I admire. I'm going to get there. Okay, now a plan for where you'll be in 5 years, and in 1 year, in the next month, and building that up. A strategist in life, dealing with your boss, dealing with colleagues, practicing it every day, catching yourself getting emotional, stepping back and saying, no, remember Robert's #1 principle, options. The person with more options wins. If you're playing chess and you it doesn't matter if the other side is decimated, if you have less pieces, but if your queen is in a position that can attack from 4 directions, you're going to win. You know, options. Think of that. You're in a new situation. How can I have options to maneuver? Be a strategist in life, not just reading the books. That's my main advice.
Amazing. Robert, thank you so much.
Oh, my
for coming on and
pleasure,
doing this
Brett.
interview.
This was a lot of fun. Thank
Great.
you.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching. This was so much fun for me to make. Robert is a real hero of mine. If you like this, there are more episodes coming just like it, so be sure to subscribe